General Charles Q. Brown, Jr. is the Chief of Staff for the Air Force and a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is the senior officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of 500,000 men and women in uniform across the Active Component Air Force, Air National Guard, and Air Force Reserve. He also serves as an advisor to the President, Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council.
Welcome, General Brown, and on behalf of all the airmen out there, we look forward to your tenure out there.
Thanks so much, Mick. It's a real pleasure to be here with NGAUS. And I was just, as I was getting ready, realized it's been about 15 years since I came to NGAUS as a lieutenant colonel in support of our Vice Chief of Staff. And so it's a real honor as the Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force to spend time with you today and talk to all of you about some of the things that are on my mind as I've taken the role and only been in the chair about 3 weeks. The first thing I would tell you is that as I came into the position, what I was focused on was with my transition team, what kind of things we were going to take a look at. And with that transition team, we went through and we're working through a paper that's going to actually come out next week. And it's focused, and the title will be Accelerate, Change, or Lose. And the key aspect of this is not that we haven't tried to change and do things a little bit different in the past, but I think we have a window of opportunity. A window of opportunity to change, because I think our advantage as a nation, as an Air Force, as a joint team, is eroding. You know, for the past 30 years, the United States Air Force has been engaged in conflict, mostly in the Middle East. At the same time, our adversaries, and particularly, and you look at the National Defense Strategy, China and Russia, have done things to accelerate and or move to impact our advantage. And so our advantage is eroding. And so that's why I say accelerate, change, or lose. And I think there's several key factors that allow us to actually do that bit of acceleration. One is the stand up the United States Space Force. And you'll hear from General Raymond right after me. But the key aspect of that is we weren't given any additional manpower to stand up the Space Force. And so as the Space Force stands up, it gives us an opportunity to look at ourselves internally as the United States Air Force and make some changes. I think there's other factors that actually will drive us to make some changes. COVID. The fact that I'm doing this conference right now virtually, this is the third event this week that I've done in a virtual form exactly like this, to be able to talk and engage with folks from around the country. The key aspect of that with COVID is we've done some things inside the Air Force because we had to change. I use our IT systems as a good example. We were talking about things that were going to take months or years to get done. We did it in a matter of weeks. I think the other aspect is racial disparity. And we're taking a hard look at ourselves, not only as a country, but really across the Air Force as well. That's another opportunity. I also believe that no matter who gets elected in November, the budget has already hit the high water mark for the Department of Defense. We'll have to take a hard look at ourselves and make some tough decisions. So all those factors coming together provide us a window of opportunity for change. And if we don't change, particularly as we look at our adversaries and China in particular, then we're going to lose. And there's things we have at stake that we will lose, and things that we have that are at risk for us that we will lose. I look at losing in great power competition. I look at losing a high-end fight. I look at losing quality airmen, losing our credibility, and unfortunately, I'm also thinking about how we might lose aspects of our national security. So all those things are factors that are on my mind, which is why we've gone down this path to accelerate, change, or lose. With that, in order to be able to accelerate change, we can't do this by ourselves. And the key aspect of this is the fact that we actually have to be able to collaborate. And I think the one thing I found as an Air Force, we tend to develop a plan, and flexibility, as we say, is the key to air power. Well, sometimes we're a little bit too flexible, and we don't articulate what we're trying to get done. I think the other aspect for the United States Air Force, we have a lot of classified programs. And because our programs are classified, we tend not to talk about those programs in a public setting. And when we try to get things done or make change, then it's hard to let go of something if you can't see what the future is. One of my goals is to make sure we collaborate. And the aspect of that is not collaborating, not only internal, it's part of it's internal to the Air Force, that's the first step, but it's how we collaborate with the Congress, how we collaborate with the Office of Secretary of Defense, how we collaborate with the Air National Guard and the tags around the country. All that collaboration, in addition to with our industry partners, all that collaboration will be highly important for us to be able to move things forward. Because we all have things at risk. And I think the dialogue is hugely important to allow us to move the ball forward to drive some of that change. We also have to balance risk as we talk to our combatant commanders. Because as a combatant commander, and having served as a deputy commander at CENTCOM, and also as a CFAC and a deputy CFAC, the thing that I see there is they're focused on today. As a service chief, my job is organize, train, and equip, and so I'm looking to the future, out to 2030 and beyond. And so we all have to take some level of risk, and we're going to have to balance that risk over time. Now, taking care of what needs to be done right now for our combatant commanders, at the same time making sure we're able to modernize our Air Force for the future. So that's another key aspect that I'm focused on. I'm also focused on how we empower airmen and build leaders. The thing I also think about in a high-end fight, the fact that I think our communications will be challenged. And if those communications are challenged, we can't wait and have the opportunity for our airmen to go back and ask for permission and get don't get a dial tone or get a busy signal because they can't get a hold of us. They got to be able to make sure they can do things without direction, without guidance, or at least having commander's intent and be able to take that and extrapolate and actually get the job done. And you can't do that waiting until you get into a high-end fight. Those are things we got to be able to do on a day-to-day basis. And so one of my goals here is to be able to delegate down to the lowest capable and competent level and allow our airmen to go do their JOB. And so with that, I'm going to do a little bit of oversight, but by and large, I want them to be able to step out and be able to do things. The other thing I'm also thinking about is leadership development and how we develop our leaders. A week ago, I was at basic military training at Lackland. And what I told our recruits that just graduated, leadership development starts the day they walk in the door. So it goes from our sessions programs all the way up through my level, where we're always developing leaders. And you think about what's going on in our country right now, whether it be COVID, racial disparity, the national defense strategy, all those factors we're blaming on the shoulders of our young folks, our young leaders. And I got to give them, and we at senior leadership have to give them the tools to be available so they can respond to that and be able to develop the leaders that are going to follow them. And so that's a key aspect of what I want to be able to do. And two parts of that is to make sure we have quality of service and quality of life. Quality of service is those that want to serve and continue to serve and continue to wear this uniform. But the quality of life is how we take care of that airman in their downtime, but also their families. And so there's key factors I'm focused on, and both of those to allow our airmen and their families to reach their full potential. And so we got to stay engaged in that regard on how we move forward. So the paper that's coming out next week is kind of explaining the why. And then we're going to take a harder look at, and I've kind of outlined some of it in Accelerate Change or Lose, what we're going to take a look at and really how we're going to get there. So I will tell you there's quite a bit of work to do to get there. Part of that aspect, though, is I also take a look at, and we have to look internally. And when I say look internally, I'm talking about the air staff and the Pentagon. We got to start there. I think the real focus is I think about the National Defense Strategy and having come out of the Indo-Pacific as the Pacific Air Forces Commander, I am focused on China. And I've been able to see some of the things that they've been doing in the course of my 2 years as a PACAF commander. And so that's an area that I'm focused on. But to do that, we got to work together. And so the guidance I actually gave to the air staff was, first of all, what they could expect from me, because I've got to look myself in the mirror first. And so I outlined my leadership tenets of execute a high standard, be disciplined execution, pay attention to detail, and have fun. And then at the same time, then I actually talked to them about how I'm going to operate as far as self-assessing myself and making some hard calls. With that, then I went back to the air staff and said, here's what I kind of expect from them. We're going to have to confront some of the challenges the Air Force has today, which is going to drive some tough calls. And we have to do it from an enterprise level. The aspect that when we actually have each of our tribes, each parts of our sectors of our Air Force that all have an opinion, at some point we got to make a decision. And be able to accelerate change, that means we're going to make some tough calls. Not everybody's going to be happy, and I understand that. But we got to actually make those calls. We actually got to be able to take a look at how we look at innovation and how we look at risk. I really believe when we talk about innovation, you can't be innovative and risk averse at the same time, which means we're going to have to take some risk as we go forward. And we got to be able to articulate that risk, the risk that happens for our airmen, for our families, for a high-end fight, and what happens for our combatant commanders and what happens for our future. So all those will be important as we move forward. We also have to be proactive in our communications and our collaboration. And the collaboration that's highlighted earlier is we got to be able to dialogue early in the process and be able to have the buy-in, or at least the socialization. It doesn't mean we're all going to agree. But the key part of that is we got to have the conversation. We can't wait till the very end and table drop a good idea and expect everybody's going to buy in. The aspect of this is how do we actually work together to figure out where the challenges are going to be as we go forward. I like to say when we have these engagements, I want to know where the friction points are. I don't want to wait and get what I call a culture of consensus with a compromise solution that sub-optimizes our best choices. I often say I want to have the meeting after the meeting in the meeting. How often have we all gone to a meeting, no one says anything until we get in the hallway, and then we all have an opinion? Or you're on a video teleconference, and then once you drop off the video teleconference, everybody in the room now has an opinion that we didn't talk about in the meeting. I want to have the meeting, after the meeting, in the meeting, which requires a bit of dialogue for us to be able to do that. The key aspect of this for me is actually how do we work better with the total force? And particularly in this body with the Air National Guard, but also with our Air Force Reserve. It's important that we look at a total force aspect. And as we look at these, we will go and make some tough calls and have to make some tough calls, but it has to be the right dialogue across the board to get to the right solution, not only for our Air Force, not only for our joint team, but for our nation. And that's a key aspect of where that dialogue comes into play as we go forward. I will not do it blindly. And one of my teammates and I is General Mike Lowe, Lieutenant General Mike Lowe, Director of the Air National Guard, newly appointed as well. I've had a chance to sit down with him. But our focus areas is how do we actually have these conversations to ensure that we're taking care of our total force, not just the active duty, but also the Guard and Reserve. And so that will be a key aspect as we go forward and do things. I will tell you, it was described in the intro there, I wear two hats. I wear a hat as a service chief, but I also wear a hat as one of the Joint Chiefs. And so from that aspect, I'm not only looking what's good for the Air Force, but I'm also looking at what's good for the joint team. In some cases, I will make decisions that are probably not best for the Air Force, or make recommendations what it may not seem best for the Air Force, but it may be best for the joint team. So just kind of keep that in mind. My job is to provide best military advice, whether it's the Secretary of the Air Force or the Secretary of Defense or the President. The last thing I'll tell you, just to share with you, I think I do have a little bit of credibility when we talk about the Guard and Reserve. When I was a squadron commander, I was a squadron commander at Shaw, and I had the Total Force Squadron, which had the Air Force Reserve members in the squadron. And then when I came to the Air Staff, we were doing Total Force, the Total Force Initiative, standing up at locations like at Hill and at Langley. I was the guy who was running the OPT. And you look at where we are today, we are more integrated as a force because we looked at a total force. And so the key aspect that I'm looking for is how do we actually continue to do that? And so with that, it's a real pleasure to be here and talk to you. I'm looking forward to your questions. I often like to say I don't necessarily have answers, I have opinions. And I'm happy to share those opinions as I go forward. And so with that, Mick, I'm ready for questions.
Well, thank you, General Brown. As we talked about, we have some times for questions from the audience. And I'll just tee it up here. I appreciate your comment there about the unity of effort amongst all the components. And this idea that we've talked about in the past, a one airman concept similar to the one Army, one soldier concept, Guard, Reserve, and Active. And a lot of that has to do with equipment. So I had a quick question about our current aircraft inventory. As you're aware, the Air National Guard currently operates about half of the tactical airlift capability, including the C-130H, which is nearly 30 years old at this point. How important is it for us to continue to modernize the Air Guard fleet, and what's your thoughts about future tactical airlift requirements?
Thanks, Mick. You know, the key aspect of this, we do need to modernize. And realizing that over time, you know, the goal here for the C-130 is to go from the H to the J. And we'll have to do that smartly. And the aspect of that is you have a more capable J, it may drive a different force mix on the H. And I was actually just meeting with General Lyons, the TRANSCOM commander, here about 10 days ago, almost 2 weeks ago, actually. And the key aspect of this is the dialogue we have as we go forward on how many J's we need versus the H's as we look at the total tactical airlift piece, and then the mission sets that we'll have to do as they do their analysis. And so modernization is a key part of this, and that's where the dialogue has to come in on how we modernize and the basing decisions that go with that modernization.
Thank you, sir. We stand ready here at NGAUS and as the groups of adjutants general and the states and territories affected by that change to collaborate with General Lowe and yourself and the rest of the air staff about what's best going forward. One of the things that you talked about was the joint team and the joint fight and the new national defense strategy and this concept of irreversible momentum. Yesterday when General McConville was here, we asked him this question, and we'd like to get your perspective as the force provider for the Air Force. What do you see the National Guard's role being in the Air Force's broader support of the national defense strategy of irreversible momentum?
Well, Mick, there's really two parts to this. I think the first part is the capability in the Air National Guard. And that's what I see. One thing I see about the Air National Guard, they have pretty much the same, by and large, the same equipment, the same level of capability, the same level of readiness that we have on the active side of the force, and a lot of experience. And so that's a key aspect that our adversaries don't have that same kind of construct. I think the other piece is when you look at the national defense strategy and we talk about competition, the one thing that we have, as well as our state partnership program, and we have allies and partners that our adversaries do not have. The state partnership program is a big deal, and having served most of my time as a general officer, either overseas or in commands that are focused overseas, the value of the state partnership program is huge because it builds those relationships, the long term, that puts us in a better position to have access, basing, overflight, and relationships that help us in great power competition to ensure that we stay ahead on the national defense strategy.
Thanks, Chief. What's your thoughts about, as we've talked about in that great power competition and force structure and how the Air Force presents forces, this discussion of 386 operational squadrons, your feelings about that, and what are your thoughts about pivoting, changing, and advancing Air Guard capacities in those enterprises?
We'll make the aspect, and when you look at the question of 386 operational squadrons, you have to go back to address kind of how that came about. And it was a question that was asked by our Congress of the Air Force of how big an Air Force do you need to actually execute the national defense strategy. It wasn't how big an Air Force can you afford, it's how big an Air Force do you need. The key aspect of this we got to take a look at is how do we get as close to 386 in capability and in number going forward. And the aspect of that is how we bring the Guard in that and using our capability and really want to make ourselves, even if we end up being a little bit smaller, I want to be more capable. And that's why modernization is key. Modernization both on the, in the Guard and on the active side of the force to ensure that we have the right capability, even if we don't get all the way up to 386. So that's a key factor I'm looking at. As I talk to our programmers, one thing I talk to them about is we can look at the money side of this. I also want to at the same time be talking capability, because too often we talk about how we're going to solve the money problem, the basing problem, but we don't talk about the capability. And to me, that's a key aspect of this to get us closer to 386, or capability is equivalent to 386.
Thanks, sir. During your remarks, you mentioned your thoughts about racial injustice and the unleashing of the power of the diversity of this great nation. We have a question here from one of our young officers. NGAUS is an association of officers and warrant officers, Army and Air, from all 54. And what would be your advice for the one thing they could do to unleash their power as a junior company grade officer or warrant officer?
Your voice. I mean, we want to hear from you. And I think that's a key aspect of being able to get a sense of kind of what our young service members are experiencing and how we at the senior level can make it better. The one area that the Air Force right now is working through is our Inspector General is doing some analysis both on how we've done discipline in the past and how we provide opportunity as we go forward. And we're going to make some changes. We're already making some changes. But this is a long-term thing, because we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight. The key aspect, though, is as we at the senior level make some decisions and implement new programs or make changes, we need feedback from the field. Because at my level, we can do something that I think was really good, is going to have a lot of impact, and out in the field, you're going to come back and tell us that was kind of a nothing burger. I'd rather you come back and give us some feedback, and that's the goal, as we start to develop some of these, implement some of these programs, the feedback from the field, from those that are impacted and affected by it, is going to be invaluable for our senior leaders as we make decisions and recommendations and make changes.
Thanks, sir. I know that we heard Chief Goldfein talk a lot about interoperability and joint all-domain command and control. Can you speak to your concept about this advanced battle management system and how you see it melding into Guard units and being fielded out there for operational capability?
Yeah, so the key part there, Mick, on advanced battle management system, I really think of, the analogy I will use is JADC2 to me is like your smartphone. Advanced battle management system is like one of the apps. And the whole goal here is to actually take the various programs from the services and how do you connect those? And the way Dr. Roper, our Chief of Acquisition, talks about it, we're trying to build the Internet of Things, in the military Internet of Things. And so it's really how do we connect data and information tools that haven't been connected before. And this is why it's important to work with our industry partners. So we actually have open mission systems so that we're not paying extra so that our IT systems talk to each other, our command and control systems talk to each other. It ought to happen automatically, just like it happens on your smartphone when you download an app from whether it's the iTunes store, or the Google store, whatever the case may be. Same kind of concept. And so for the Guard and Reserve, the key part of this is you can actually do command and control just about from anywhere if you can connect. And that's an aspect, and we've proven that we're able to do that in the past. We're doing it today, and we'll probably do, I guarantee we're going to do it more in the future.
Thanks, Chief. You know, yesterday, like I mentioned, we had General McConville here, and one of the questions, and I see it's come up again from our audience, is the continuum of service. I remember Chief General Welsh talking about this, and then General Goldfein, and I'm sure you want to continue this, but this is about the idea of kind of an airman for life and the ability to move from Guard, Reserve, and Active, and creating a more fluid system and a more user-friendly system. What's your thoughts about advancing that initiative in your tenure as the chief?
You know, Mick, I'm all for that. And really, this is when I talk about quality of service. That's one aspect of it. And you still want to serve, and there may be a time in your life or with your family that you just need to change how you're serving, and then you want to come back. An interesting point is, as the PACAF commander, you know, I went to Australia and talked to the Australian Air Chief, and they have a continuum of service. As a matter of fact, he talked to me. They had more people come back to the Royal Australian Air Force than they had leave a couple years ago. And so we ought to have that same kind of capability to bring, and actually some of those folks actually came back and were able to get into leadership positions. I think we ought to be able to do that. It'll be a cultural shift for our force to be able to do that and not penalize somebody from a promotion and opportunity standpoint if you're going back and forth between different aspects. I think the last part I'd add to that is, you know, we got to work with Congress on some of this as we have the ability to allow our service members to move back and forth between the reserve component and the active duty.
Yes, sir. We've been working hard with General Hokanson and his staff and the OSD policy folks to work through some duty status reform to take down some of the legislative obstacles to move between components, and we appreciate the support of the Air Force on that initiative. You know, I'll hit you with the Space Force question here. Obviously, General Jay Raymond is up next. We have about 1,100 of our service members that are currently airmen, mostly airmen, but not all, some Army Guardsmen, that are currently involved in enterprises for the Space National Guard, or for the Space Force. What's your thought about the National Guard and its role through a Space National Guard in the future?
Well, the first thing I'd offer up is I'm going to probably defer part of that to General Raymond when he comes up. I'm sure he's got some thoughts on it. But what I would say is the key aspect that as a stand-up to the Space Force, there's quite a bit of work that the Air Force will do in support of the Space Force. I would say the same thing for the Guard, whether it's just staying as part of the Air National Guard or if there was a Guard element of the Space Force that stood up, I think there's going to be opportunity. So if you have an interest in space, whether it's in the Space Force or as part of the United States Air Force, as part of the total force, I think there's plenty of opportunity.
Yes, sir. So this will be our last question, and again, appreciate you taking the time. We know how busy you are. It's kind of a two-parter. We have not been able to see really many folks out visiting our 90 wings in the Guard, and we want to extend the invitation to you as the new chief to visit the 90 wings across the 50 states, 3 territories, and District of Columbia. Can't wait to see you there. And with that, the reason we haven't seen anybody out and about is because of COVID-19. So just quickly, your thoughts about the Guard's response to not just COVID-19, but all of the call-ups. Nearly 90,000 Guardsmen called up over the last 6 months for either COVID-19, local emergencies, or civil unrest.
No, I'll just say that our Guardsmen have been pretty busy here over the past several months, or a good part of 2020. And so my hat's off to all of our Guardsmen, from both the Army Guard and the Air Guard, for the things they've been able to do. And in some cases, doing some things that they weren't expecting they were going to have to do. I mean, who would have thought we'd be dealing with a pandemic? And the aspect of the work that they're doing is tremendous. And I've actually had a chance, less so here in the mainland, but particularly my job at PACAF, working with the Hawaii Air National Guard, the Alaska Air National Guard, and the Guard there in Guam, to see them in action in support of many of the activities and some of the natural disasters that we see, but also in support of COVID. And so great work, and hopefully we'll be able to settle down a little bit and let these Guardsmen take a bit of a break with all the activity we've had throughout the course of 2020.
Well, sir, thank you so much. As I said, as a fellow airman, we are so proud of your service and your time in the United States Air Force. In nearly 4 decades of service, we know you're going to serve us proud as a great chief, and thank you for taking the time today. You know, it's been barely 3 weeks since General Brown assumed this position as the new Chief of Staff of the Air Force, but he did not hesitate to accept the invitation to talk to all the soldiers and airmen, all 456,000 of them, across the states and territories today. And, sir, I think that speaks volume to how important you believe the National Guard is in the future defense of the nation and the total Air Force. And I appreciate your time, and we have a coin. It's up there on the screen. It's in the shape of a laptop for, it actually opens. So quite a unique coin, and your staff will be receiving that in this era of physical distancing. Chief, and thank you again for taking the time. General Brown, we're proud to serve shoulder to shoulder with you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Mick, and I really do appreciate the opportunity. You had it spot on, the fact that the importance of the National Guard to what we do, whether it's active, reserve component, but what we do for our nation is hugely important. So thanks so much and appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks for sharing the stage with me today, Chief. Appreciate it.